to be kind of on our radar. So on the inhibit scale, he scored clinically elevated, meaning that it's very hard for him to be in control of himself, especially with peers in the classroom. He requires a lot of adult supervision. His self-monitor scale was also clinically elevated, meaning it's very hard for him to understand the effect that his behavior has on others. He doesn't really have any insight into how he presents to others and what he's doing to others with his behavior. He also had a clinically elevated score for emotional control, meaning when he is flooded with emotion, he can't moderate that. He is explosive with his emotion, whether it's rage or screaming or breaking things, whatever. It's very hard for him to manage emotions, and especially anger. And just his regular emotional regulation index was very high. And, you know, this is important to me, and it informs my opinion, because we see when children have been traumatized, and normally very early childhood trauma will create a child that has huge problems with inhibition, emotional control, and they are completely unaware that, you know, everything that's going on around them is because of them.
So you mentioned just now that this is about sort of what happens in early childhood. You also mentioned that these are tests of executive functioning. So let's start with this. When is executive functioning developed in a person?
Well, executive functioning is ongoing, right? So the brain is continuing to grow, and the brain might continue to grow into adulthood until the 20s or in the 30s in some case. So, so that's a dynamic process. Well, when we see things like in this testing, normally we can relate it back to children in early childhood, because it's early childhood where we learn to manage our emotions, to not act out, to kind of be aware of how we are and what our peers think about us. And so that's a pivotal point where that part of the brain can be damaged, and then we can start to see testing like this.
Is it your opinion that those resulted from early childhood neglect?
Yes, that is my opinion.
Why is that your opinion?
I feel like that the early childhood neglect that we see in him from, you know, being in a foreign orphanage, and from the records that I reviewed from that orphanage show, not only did he have severe neglect and it was malnourished. They were feeding the children sugar water in one of the records. And there was a very high infant to caretaker ratio, so that caretakers can't take care of all these babies that are in the orphanage, so they didn't get their needs met. He also had scabies on his body that were not treated medically. So this is a child that was severely neglected. We have no idea what happened to him the first 7 months of life before he was put on the orphanage door. We have no idea the neglect or the abuse. But I think that when you see that type of neglect, there is definite brain reaction from that. There's no way that you can have a child that is being neglected, and really, if you think about being ignored or the scabies, like even medically neglected and abused, that would not have some kind of brain fallout because of that.
To state the obvious, is that prior to the Ferriters adopting him? Yes. When was this neuropsychological test conducted, if you have it on there?
I will look. October of 2022.
Is the fact that if it was after January 28th, 2022, change your opinion about the fact that
you know, even 2 years before, we probably would have seen a very, very similar pattern. We probably would have even seen a similar pattern when he was younger, because we can tell through the records that this is impulse control, self-monitoring, emotional regulation. These were things he consistently had problems with across all settings.
Is there any evidence in the records that any of the physicians or psychiatrists or social workers that the Ferriters went to recommended a neuropsychological evaluation?
No, I never saw that recommendation.
I now want to talk about another opinion in this.
I do believe that his symptoms are an indicative of an attachment disorder.
Why?
So in order, first of all, I see reactive attachment disorder was diagnosed in the records for him, starting as early as I believe he was 7 or 8. I don't know that at 7 or 8 they had fully diagnosed it, but the therapist was telling the parents, hey, I think this is more than what I thought it was, and I think I think it might be reactive attachment disorder. And then it was more formally diagnosed by a psychiatrist a couple of years after that. So I not only see it in the records, but also in terms of the behaviors that we were seeing and through the records, point to a child that's having problems with attachment and pretty significant behaviors because of it.
So let me stop you there because I want to understand what an attachment disorder is. So what's attachment?
Well, attachment is the most fundamental, basic thing that children need in order to be successful in life, in order to make friends, have intimate partners, being good at their job. Being able to attach to people means that you have stability, you have empathy because you can understand what someone else is feeling and not just yourself. It also helps you establish trust so that you can have a relationship where you can be independent and someone can trust you and you can trust them that they're going to meet your needs if you need it. When children early on don't get that, there's a whole disruption that happens that affects every part of their life because we're social creatures. And if you're not able to trust people and navigate life socially, then there's a problem and it leads to what we call a disorder.
When is attachment developed in a person?
A lot of attachment issues have been looked at, of course, in my field, because it is such an important issue and a lot of things hinge on your ability to attach in a healthy way. Normally what we see is there's a cycle of attachment from the moment that child is born. So what we see in the cycle is a child that is born, and let's say that child is wet or soiled or hungry or cold. That child starts crying. Immediately an adult comes, a caretaker comes, picks up that child, takes care of that child, soothes that child. The child's then able to self-regulate, go back to sleep, or whatever they're doing. This cycle occurs thousands of times with parents. If you've ever had a newborn, it's constant. And if you're constantly going after that newborn every time they cry, soothing that newborn, helping that newborn then learns, I have someone I can trust, I have someone I can attach to, and I know that if I get out of control or I need something, there's an adult that's going to come along and that adult is going to help me. Children that do not get this, there's an interruption in that attachment. So you can imagine all the things. They don't trust that anyone will ever take care of them. They don't trust that their needs will be met. They can't see the world from anyone else's perspective. So attachment is a huge thing.
When we talk about attachment, what separates attachment disorder from a kid that's just kind of awkward? Because it sounds like it's something that affects the personality, but is it just that you kind of end up being uncomfortable or awkward, or are there other behaviors associated with having an attachment disorder?
When you have a disorder in general, so I'll talk in general first. When you have a disorder, a lot of people, you'll hear people say, oh my gosh, I've got bipolar, I'm so moody, or oh, that kid's got ADHD, he's so hyper. It's not just something that's at the level that we normally see in life. It's at a level that we think that it is clinically significant, and it's a disorder. It's disrupting their life. It's disrupting the lives of people around them. So just because the nature of the disorder means that this is something that's hugely problematic, and hugely problematic not just to the person that has it, but to the other people that are around that person. And in terms of attachment disorder in particular, what we normally see, so normally you'll get a child that has a reactive attachment disorder. They come out of a very bad environment. They go into a home that's loving and kind and has stability and structure. We normally see that the child begins to get better. So the attachment disorder gets better. There are children who have what we call persistent reactive attachment disorder, where the damage was so severe in childhood that as they get older, we don't necessarily see that damage start to go away. If they're plugged into the right therapies and they know the right places to go, and some of them, have to go to higher levels of care, then we might see some sort of healing, but it's something that they will struggle with, for some of these kids, for their life.
What behaviors are associated with reactive attachment disorder?
Objection. Relevance.
Overruled.
Go ahead. What behaviors are associated with reactive attachment disorder?
Not sure why the prosecution objected there. This is something they've owned, that the kid had reactive attachment disorder. All right, we got to hit a break, friends. Whose expert witness do you like better? Hit us up on social media. Let us know. We're going to hit the pause button so you won't miss any of this. We'll get you back in the courtroom live after this break.
Florida father accused of locking his son in a box in the garage with a bed, a bucket, and a camera.
He was locked in a room for hours at a time.
Police say this abuse went unnoticed for years.
There are ring videos that the state provided of the child lying.
He faces up to 40 years.
I'm not sure they're going to be able to justify it. What's going on in this house?
The Boy in a Box trial. Live coverage today on Court TV.
Thanks for staying with us. Let's go back to the Florida courtroom where we're seeing the defense expert witness in the Boy in a Box trial.
Attachment disorder.
So when you look at, so when we diagnose, as psychologists, as psychiatrists, anyone in the mental health field, we have to use the diagnostic and statistical manual. So this tells us what signs and symptoms to look for and how to diagnose. So if you're going to look up reactive attachment disorder in the DSM, you're going to just find pretty much a general way of looking at symptoms. So it will be that the child cannot be soothed by their caretaker. The caretaker tries when the child is out of control to soothe them, and the child wants none of it and continues to tantrum. Or the child doesn't go to that caretaker for the caretaker to take care of them. Most children, when they get hurt, run to their parent. No, these children do not. They kind of keep the parent away. So there's kind of a general way of describing reactive attachment disorder when you see it in your practice. However, when you start to look at when people are studying this issue, what you will see is that there are certain behaviors that are kind of indicative of a kid that has reactive attachment disorder. And it would include lying, frequent lying for no good reason, just lies that make no sense. It can be aggression, it can be violence, it can be being mean to animals, being mean to younger children, stealing, hoarding. Food is a big issue for children with reactive attachment disorder. So they gorge on food or they steal food. They're constantly food preoccupied. Some of them don't eat. So it really just depends on, how that is manifesting in each individual child. But it's a significant psychological disorder when you see the symptoms involved of children whose reactive attachment disorder did not get better just because they were put in a loving home. Yeah, so there's multiple records that talk about the behaviors that the family was seeing and dealing with in the home, from psychiatrists, from a treatment provider in 2015, all the way up. All the way up to now, we see these behaviors. So it was pretty well documented that the behaviors that were being seen were indicative of a reactive attachment disorder. The lying, the stealing, especially the food issues, just almost everything. cruelty to animals or being mean to animals. I'm not going to say cruel like horrible, but being mean to animals, being mean to younger, more vulnerable children. These types of things we do see in his history.
And does that predate, let's say, about May of 2018?
The very first record I saw where the family was really describing the behaviors that they were dealing with was 2015. So I believe he was 7 or 8 at that time.
You talked a little bit about gorging being common for children with attachment disorder. Can you sort of take us through what happens and why that happens?
Well, I mean, I think it's easy to understand. If you are starving as an infant and nobody is feeding you, then your brain has learned that you can be hungry and you're not going to get taken care of. You're not going to get fed. So it becomes a preoccupation with food, a preoccupation on how do I get food, and when I do get food, I want to eat every single thing that I can eat immediately. Or I'm going to hoard food. I'm going to hide food in my room. I'm going to hide food in my backpack so that I'll always have food. It's really very sad because it really is from a brain that was so deprived of basic needs, and now even, into childhood, they're still struggling with that kind of stuff. Having any kind of breaks on food when he does get a hold of something sweet, to the point of even stealing food.
Is that sort of gorging of food and hoarding of food, I mean, is that healthy for a child? Should a parent allow that to continue to happen?
No, you wouldn't allow a child to gorge on food.
Is there any indication in the record that the Ferriters were educated by a psychiatrist or a medical professional about how to handle this gorging issue in a meaningful way?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Sustained. You can rephrase, Ms. Moran.
Sure. Do you have any opinion, and we'll talk about this more in detail, as to whether the Ferriters acted with malice?
Do I have an opinion? Yes.
Okay, what's that opinion?
I do not think that they were maliciously trying to harm their child and make things worse.
I want to talk about that in more detail in a little bit, but as it relates to the food, why do you think that?
Well, I don't understand.
Sure. So I want to talk about your opinion regarding them not having malice and what they that they were not acting maliciously.
Oh, okay. So I think that not only in Ronan's deposition, but also in having sugary snacks. They mentioned the snacks that she allowed them to have. And forgive me if I'm wrong, but it was stuff like granola and yogurt and bananas and things like that. The sister testified and her...
Sustained.
Without So I guess, not speaking about your beliefs, but what the records actually show, what efforts were made by the Ferriters that makes you believe that it was not malicious?
Objection as to hearsay.
Overruled, but the witness is instructed not to relate what anyone said to you, just what you reviewed and what drives your opinion.
Go ahead.
According to the records, a pediatrician told mom not to give...
Sustained.
Do you have any belief, is it your opinion that the Ferriters
Overruled as to that. You can answer, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Okay. How are children with attachment perceived by adults who are not their parents?
Oh, that's a good question.
Can you restate that question again?
Sure. How are children with attachment perceived by adults who are not their parents?
Sustained.
Can we approach on this, Judge?
Can.
How could she possibly answer that question? That calls for speculation. That is the basis of that objection. It should be sustained. This is a mess, in my opinion. I want to bring in my guest watching along. She is a retired police sergeant with the Nashville Police Department. Melissa Pinkleton has lots of experience handling child abuse cases. And Sergeant, you've been through a lot of trials too. And looking at the advocacy, I am just, like, my head is spinning. I want more organization from my witness. How about you?
Yeah, this witness is a disaster, and I don't know if it's her lack of experience testifying, but everything that she's trying to answer, it seems like they didn't prep her well, or she is not experienced in testifying, and it's not coming across well at all. It's coming across very unorganized, very PC, very blotchy, and it's not good for the defense at all. And I noticed the defendant's facial expressions in some of this, because you have it squared up that way. You know, you could tell he's getting frustrated by it too. You could tell him pursing his lips several times. That he's getting, but the objections, you know, and I understand I'm not an attorney, but even I know enough that, nope, that's speculation. Nope, that's hearsay, speculation. And the prosecution is nailing all of it. They're calling every single one of the objections right. And the judge is on point too. So yeah, I don't know how they're going to pull this together. I mean, they need to just take a break, regroup, and try and salvage this testimony. And I don't know if they're going to be able to do it.
Excellent point, Sergeant. Excellent point. And they should. They should actually ask for a break. And really, the lawyer, I blame the lawyer, because when you ask a bad question like that, you're just inviting the other side to object. You have attorneys on the ball like these prosecutors in Palm Beach County, Florida are, as you said, Sergeant. They're going to stand up, take that opportunity to object. Now they're at sidebar again. The jury's got to be frustrated with all these breaks. It's like the witness can't even get through the testimony because the questions are choppy, poorly phrased, disorganized. Oh my goodness. So, okay, here's what we're going to do. They're still at the sidebar. We're going to squeeze in our break while they're there. Sergeant Pinkleton's going to stay with me. Please do the same. We'll be right back with the boy in a box trial after this. I've worked hard all my life. I've gone from being a local reporter to becoming a law student to then even going on to teach other lawyers, all before I came to Court TV. As a journalist, lawyer, and teacher, I learned the secret to success is speaking in your authentic voice. And I bring that lesson to my show, Opening Statements, every morning on Court TV.
Opening Statements with Julie Grant, this morning at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
Thanks for being with us here on Court TV Live. Let's go back into the courtroom now. We're watching the boy in a box trial in Palm Beach County, Florida. The defense expert witness on the stand. Lots of objections because of improper questions. Let's go back in together now.
With reactive attachment disorder, is manipulation by the child who is diagnosed, is that common?
Yes.
Okay, can you explain that to us?
Yes, so these are children that want control over their environments. They don't trust adults. They are, you know, looking for ways not only to seek attention, but also to manipulate, to get their needs met. They feel like they have to manipulate to get their needs met, and rather than being direct about it, because their needs were never met directly. Yes.
Explain that to us without getting into anything prior to his age of about 9 or 10.
Okay. Are you asking me what, in
What
general,
behaviors did
what
Ronan
happened
exhibit?
before 9 and 10?
Dr.
no, I'm
Rappa,
sorry.
Dr. Rappa, can you pull the mic a little closer to you?
sorry.
So you picked up better. All right,
You
thank
got
you.
it.
No, I'm sorry. I'm asking you to talk about specific behaviors in the record that have led you to that opinion without getting into the specifics of anything prior to the age of 8 or 9.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
9 or 10.
Thank you for the clarification.
No problem.
At one point,
I'm going to sustain the objection. You can restate the question, and we'll hear the answer again.
Is there, and on what basis, Your Honor?
I'm sorry?
On what basis is it sustained?
Her opinion as to whether he's interesting or not is not relevant to the case.
Okay, without saying that he's interesting, could you explain what behaviors you reviewed in the record that are helping inform your opinion?
Okay. So in the record, there were instances.
Overruled. You can state what you reviewed, ma'am, and how it informed your opinion, but you cannot go into detail about what specifically was said because that's hearsay. So you have to be able to answer the question posed by your attorney without disclosing specifically what was said by someone outside of this courtroom.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Do you understand that instruction?
I think.
All right, well, we'll see if you can follow
See if I
it.
don't.
All right, go ahead.
So what records did you review that indicated that?
School records, also records of when he would go to the doctor or saw the psychologist or psychiatrist.
Did you have an opportunity is indicative of attachment disorder?
I mean, I don't know that you would look at him and you would say that the way you present is, an attachment disorder. But the things that I noticed in the deposition or that were kind of flags for me as a psychologist, he is very kind of detached from what he talks about. He can talk about it in an intellectual way, but he doesn't necessarily talk about it in an emotional way. So he kind of gives you facts without necessarily having that emotional congruence with the facts. One of the things that is interesting to me is that during the deposition, he was pretty blunt affect. He doesn't have a whole lot of affect on his face, whether it's, joy or anger or anything, it's kind of blunted. However, during times where he would talk about things that he had done, such as giving beer to his younger brother, and to see the effects of alcohol on young children, he started giggling. Or he would laugh when he would talk about that he went into his sister's classroom.
Overruled. You can only say what his observations were and his response, but not what he said specifically. So overruled.
Go ahead, Dr. Rappa.
So he would laugh at inappropriate things that he had done. But other than that type of laughter, he was pretty blunted in terms of his affect.
Why? I think you called it congruence. What do you mean by congruence?
It's really important when we're communicating with people that we are congruent. So what we're feeling is what we're showing to that person. If you're feeling something and not necessarily showing it, then people can kind of pick up that you're incongruent, something is going on with you, and it leads to lack of trust. So it's important. Congruence is important. It's also important because it makes somebody predictable, so that if you say something to me and I know that you are someone who what you say is exactly what you feel, then I can trust you and I can predict your behavior towards me. When people are not congruent, you can't necessarily predict their behavior towards you because what they're saying and what they're actually feeling are two different things. So the congruence is a huge issue in relationships.
Why is that concerning for children in particular? That lack of congruence.
A lack of congruence in children, one of the things that an adult role is to teach children to be congruent, to teach children what you're feeling is what you need to be speaking, in a respectful way, but you need to speak your feelings. If they don't have that, then the child is an unpredictable child because the child can parrot back to you what they know you want to hear, but they're not necessarily changing anything internally.
What is the treatment for an attachment disorder? What are the treatments?
There are treatments for attachment disorder. There are also some treatments for attachment disorder that are very, off the cuff and not good treatments, and nobody really, and professionals would recommend them. But the treatment right now for attachment disorder, most people would treat it as a trauma-based disorder, and they would do trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy or regular cognitive behavioral therapy. There's dialectical therapy. There's certain therapies that are known to work with children that have attachment issues.
Were any of those ever recommended to the Ferriters?
Objection as to hearsay.
Sustained.
Is it your opinion that the Ferriters were, do you have an opinion as to whether the Ferriters acted with malice when it comes to the treatment of attachment disorder?
Yes.
Okay, what is that?
Madam Mara, can you approach for a second?
Oh my gosh, even the judge caught that was an inappropriate, impermissible question. She could ask the question about whether or not you have an opinion that the child was abused or falsely imprisoned. She can ask those questions, but not if they acted with malice. Like, that's terrible phrasing. She's not going to know what the intent is there. Even the judge did that objection. You know, they call it sua sponte. You know, the judge makes the objection. That is that terrible. This lawyer's got to really get on the ball here with the questions here. We're going to have sidebar after sidebar and no answers. I'm being told it's over. I'm sure he told counsel to move on. Let's watch.
The court is reconsidering its prior ruling on the question of whether there were any recommended treatments. Ms. Murad, you can ask the witness that question with respect to her review of the records that she had presented to her in this matter. But, ma'am, just so you know, you're only able to answer that question with respect to the records you reviewed. You're not allowed to get into that with respect to anything else anybody else may have said to you, because that would be hearsay. But if there's something in the records that can form a basis for you to answer the question, I'll allow you to do that. Okay?
Thank you, Your Honor. Based on the records that you reviewed and coming to your various opinions in this case, is there any evidence that the Ferriters were recommended those treatments that you just mentioned?
No.
Is there any evidence in the records that you reviewed that they were recommended inpatient treatment for attachment disorder?
No.
Is there any evidence in the record that the Ferriters were recommended to go to a specialist for attachment disorders?
No.
And just so we're clear, Ms. Murad, you're talking about the records that she reviewed,
Yes.
not in the record in the global sense
Not
of
that
this
you know the
proceeding.
records, just the ones you have. Yes. All right. I want to go into, Your Honor, my next opinion does require me to approach. I'm wondering if it's a good time for a break.
Yeah, it is good because we've been going about an hour and a half this morning. So we'll take a break, 15-minute break. It's almost 10:30. We'll be in recess until 10:45.